Hello, I'm Kathrin LaFaver. I'm a movement disorder specialist in Saratoga Springs, New York. And I have the pleasure of talking today with Dr. Indu Subramanian, a clinical professor at UCLA in California, and the first author of a paper just published in Parkinsonism and Related Disorders. It entitled Delivering the Diagnosis of Parkinson's Disease, Setting the Stage for Hope and Compassion. So I love the title. And to start it off, do you want to just tell us a bit what gave you the motivation to look into this topic?
During the pandemic, I was hosting a virtual support group with a number of voices throughout the world who are thought leaders in the care of Parkinson's patients. Some of the discussions actually included a number of patient voices, and I became involved in some of the advocacy community, learning about what has served patients well in terms of what we do and what they found somewhat harmful in terms of what we've done as a treatment team sometimes. And I was actually quite surprised at how impactful some of the conversations around how people got the diagnosis were. For example, Kuhan, who is one of the authors, who's a patient voice, he lives in the UK. He's a young Sri Lankan origin man who lives there. And he was talking about, literally the day that he got the diagnosis with such clarity, such pristine memories of, the sky, the light, the paint in the office. And this is sort of moment in time that is frozen. Now, 10 years later, he sort of looks back on that as a really pivotal moment for him and really recalls that sometimes negative energy and like how it could have been done better. Sonia Mathur, who's an amazing patient voice as well, who herself is actually a family doc who's practiced in Canada, and about, what are their thoughts on how we can do better. And so we ended up pairing with some of these patient voices and also some world leaders in some of the space. So Bart Post is a neurologist who is very interested in early onset or young onset Parkinson's disease and runs a center for them in the Netherlands. And Annette Schrag, who is the senior author, she's devoted a number of years of her career to really learn better about how patients want to perhaps create plans for self-management. She's had a number of interviews, focus groups with patient voices, and a lot of the data in our paper is her data. Did they feel like the disease was given with compassion? Did they feel like they got these types of informations? What do they walk out of the office with the notion of, what are the lifestyle choices they can do? So it's a really nice collaboration. And we also had a psychologist who we included in the paper who could kind of fill in some of the psychology of, getting bad news.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the main goals and the writing process, given that such a diverse group of people was involved?
It's a paper that I'm actually really proud of because I think what really is the underpinnings of the paper are actually direct quotes from the patient voices. And so we have Kuvan, for example, really in his own words, talking about, how he wished it had gone differently. Some of his advocacy work is now helping newly diagnosed patients with their diagnosis and to move forward in a constructive way to sort of feel positive about the years that they have to live with Parkinson's and what they can do to live better. So I urge you to read that. Sonia brings in some of the advocacy work, what she's learned from being a person living with Parkinson's and really educating other folks for the last 20 years. So that was sort of the basis, is really these quotes. And then we looked at the data to see, what has been spoken about. One part of the paper also talks about the work from Bas Bloom and a colleague of his who wrote a paper about hopamine as sort of a pill that we should be administering. They talk about the fact that one, as a physician, as a clinician, has a responsibility to bring some hope to an encounter like this, but then to also allow the person that living with the disease to formulate sort of their own sort of sense of hope that may apply to their own sort of process. So a person living with this disease, it might take them some time to develop that hope, and giving really false hope or empty words at the beginning, using words like, for example, the honeymoon period, which was also dispelled in another paper by Boss and co-authors as something that we shouldn't be using. We shouldn't be using this term honeymoon period. That doesn't land well with our patients in such a serious disease state. No point is this really, a honeymoon or an amazingly pleasant experience. And so we should be really mindful of some of the words that we, I think, as a community of neurologists are picking and choosing, and how they land with the people living with this disease.
That's a good point. The paper outlines a number of different graphs and tables and kind of key points to consider when giving someone a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Could you just walk us a little bit through the process and some of the key points that you think are most important?
First of all, I want to say, this is not a paper to make anyone who's a clinician feel bad. I know that I think you and I, Catherine, realize that the healthcare system as it exists is effectively broken. I mean, we as clinicians are being asked to do more and more, um, you know, very complex work, managing patients that are very sick, often with not a lot of support, and we are asked to do this in a smaller and smaller time frame, along with increasing demands on documentation. So I think that I am not here to, judge anyone's sort of work, but I think this paper is just to say that this is how giving this sort of disease and a certain diagnosis in a certain manner can affect the trajectory of a patient, for decades to come. And so if we do this with a sense that these words matter, that this time frame matters, and if it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that those 15 minutes that we have with the patient, the way that we're expressing this, the way that we're able to connect with the patient one-on-one, to give them that time to really, understand these words, to reflect back to us what they're feeling, for us to then again, give them resources that they can go and collect and use until the next time we meet them. I think these are all important takeaways. I think first and foremost, having a quiet space, having protected time. We're seeing patients that are often frazzled, and no one else is there to really take down the information or to advocate for the patient and support the patient once we leave the room. And so I really have been trying to get patients to bring a loved one in, a trusted friend in, just to be an extra set of eyes and ears, and to be able to write things down and really to then support that patient. A lot of my research has been on the need for support, social connection as a buffer. And honestly, from day one of disease, I think that it can really matter. If it is a rushed encounter, perhaps at the first visit, allowing the patient to maybe reschedule a visit where you have more time, bring in a loved one at that time if it's possible on that first visit. We don't have to give every piece of information that ever existed on Parkinson's. Perhaps, delivering the diagnosis, rescheduling an appointment, perhaps engaging another member or two of the team. If you have a nurse, some places have a Parkinson's 101 class. Some of the support groups have a support group leader, who may be able to take that person on and match them, honestly, with perhaps somebody who's a little further on in the disease course, who can then serve as also, a support to the person. So I think, really understanding that these words matter, this time matters, how we deliver the disease matters. There is hope. There are things that the person living with the disease can do every day in terms of lifestyle choices. You have a very treatable disorder. If you can start exercising, if you can get some social connection, find somebody to connect with every day, good sleep, good hydration, eating right, and incorporate some self-care time with some mind-body approach time, perhaps, some yoga, some meditation, prayer, all of these things I think can be some things that the patient feels that they can do proactively until the next visit. Because what people living with this disease are really often hearing, and may not be what is actually said, but what they're taking away often is, here's a pill, come back in 6 months. So they feel often highly unsupported, and often then kind of get into the Googling of Parkinson's and going down various rabbit holes that are often very negative. Have the patient leave the office feeling like, we are part of the team, we are going to work together, for years to come, and we're here for you. Here's a support group, if that's available to you, or, here are some lifestyle choices, and let's continue the dialogue. Also normalizing the reactions that can happen. So in our paper, we wrote a number of bubble diagrams of normal sort of reactions: anger, fear, frustration, a number of things, grief, anxiety, depression. So you have a disorder, Parkinson's disease, that already has a lot of mental health issues that come along with it. And then the reaction to the diagnosis can really exacerbate some of these issues. And so normalizing these reactions, just like if we had given a diagnosis of cancer or a terminal illness, the sense that a person may go through some reactions is actually very common. But if you're that person living with the disease and then you don't realize that what you're feeling is a normal reaction, you can actually then feel more isolated and not feel like, there's anyone to really help you.
One of the issues I'm hearing is really offering that relative short-term follow-up, and it's certainly something I have tried to incorporate more in my own practice. I used to usually see people after 3 months or so. So currently, when I do see someone, and especially when I started on a medication, I try to offer a 6-week follow-up because I've definitely found it very helpful. And as you said, sometimes with a first visit, it can be a bit of a information overload. It can be hard to find a balance of explaining enough, but also not overwhelming patients. So trying to see them back relatively soon and also trying to give additional resources that are reliable and possibly even having a support element, I think can be very helpful. What was really pointed out in the paper was being sensitive to someone's cultural background when giving this diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Could you give me some examples how that would kind of come into play in clinical practice?
We wrote a paper, a sister paper to this about stigma. And, for example, in Hindu culture, when somebody gets a news of a disease state, there is a sense that, karma. So, there's something that we did in our previous life or in this life that led to this diagnosis occurring. And so people sometimes have some self-blame and shame and often won't even tell their own family members or extended family members about the diagnosis because of this negative attribution for why they got the disease. And so understanding, a patient's understanding of, their disease state, what happened and why this could have happened, and that nothing they did, to our knowledge caused this is actually good to know, to dispel those myths. The African sort of diaspora and in Africa itself, there's been a sense that sometimes, there's a witchcraft element. Somebody's been possessed if they start tremoring, or people are hidden again from their whole communities in back rooms and really not allowed to kind of socialize. And so I think understanding what the mythology is, how this disease affects not only the person living with it, but their family dynamic can actually be really helpful for delivering care moving forward. And I think if we miss that mark, one cookie cutter kind of way of delivering care to everyone, I think we're really excluding a lot of people. We've talked about the fact that women, for example, often don't have the time and feel guilty when they can't take care of other people. They feel really bad if they can't be the caregiver. And so for them to be in this role and sometimes needing care, needing help, needing social support from, perhaps their sister or mother or sorority sister or their daughter, that is an extra layer of something that we need to say is necessary and important and kind of help them build that in. And so I think customizing this to each person that we see in front of us, for some people, spiritual, support from a religious leader is huge. So you get a diagnosis like this, and they're going to go talk to their rabbi, or their priest, and then that's who's going to give them comfort. So I think, understanding who gives you comfort, who's your support mechanism, what is your understanding of why you got this disease, is really, I think, part of what we need to do to help people to do better and to not only just live better, but also even thrive in the setting of some of these diagnoses.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes I've discovered some of these just myths or changed beliefs that might be different from us and the medical kind of established community, and that kind of comes out later. And then it's very, very helpful to really, I think, ask patients, and then it doesn't have to be all of the same in the first visit, but ask kind of some questions about their understanding of the disease and really have that open conversation to try to dispel some of these myths, as you mentioned. So if we're talking about Parkinson's disease, do you see any parallels with other neurologic disorders or other issues, in the field of medicine we can learn from?
Absolutely. A paper like this hadn't quite been written in Parkinson's, including the patient voices, but I think when you read the quotes, you'll realize that this isn't just Parkinson's disease, insert, ALS, insert Alzheimer's disease, many chronic neurologic diseases, and other diseases too. Some of the framework that we came up with was actually from the cancer literature. We talk about this spikes framework of giving news, even if we don't have data in our own sort of disease state, I think what we did was look at, palliative care literature, cancer literature, what do they have there, try to customize it to our patients. And then other disease states, that we take care of in neurology, I think we can also utilize the same framework. And, I want to say that, not just in the disease state, but I think when we look at the settings in which we're all practicing and who's actually, the one giving the diagnosis, Mike Oken and I wrote a blog about this paper as well. When you look at the laundry list of all the things that could be done in this interaction, it could take 2 days. We want to kind of start to drizzle some of these ideas in and to incorporate some things in certain interactions and some things maybe more applicable to other interactions. But I think the hope about this paper is really to sort of take a step back and say, how can we set ourselves off on the right footing that in the long run may actually help the patient as well as our own rapport with them, and how to really get them often to sort of adopt. Sometimes our treatments are very complex and require, multiple pills, multiple dosing. And a lot of the times we're like kind of confused as to why there's a lack of compliance or adoption, or people don't come back to see us. And I think, when people feel seen, when people feel heard, when there's a sense that the doctor kind of wants to understand them and meet them where they are, I think that automatically is hopefully going to set things off on the right foot. And I think we can apply that throughout medicine in general.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for these enlightening words. So it was my pleasure talking to you. I encourage everyone to read the paper. So again, delivering the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, setting the stage of hope and compassion in Parkinsonism and related disorders. Thank you again. Have a good rest of your day.